Welcome to Peacebuilding Initiatives with José Barzola. Peacebuilding Initiatives are collaborative ways of developing healthy, positive relationships via dialogue, cross-cultural understanding, and exploring ways to shift our own perspective to build compassion and empathy within our communities. Thank you for joining us today. On today's episode, we are joined by Dr. Peter Adler, who is a seasoned mediator, strategist, and negotiation expert with decades of experience helping leaders tackle high stakes conflicts. As a partner at Hawaii based Guild Consulting, he works with organizations across the public, private, and civic sectors on complex issues related to energy, environment, health, and governance. Dr. Adler has held top leadership roles, including president and CEO of the Keystone Center, and was the founding director of the Hawaii Supreme Court Center for Alternative Dispute Resolution. Uh, he's also the author of Calming the Storm, a leader's handbook for managing unproductive conflicts, published in 2024, and offers practical tools for navigating today's most challenging disputes. On today's conversation, we'll talk about consensus seeking as leadership and leadership as consensus seeking. So really excited to have you here, Peter. Thank you so much for your time. And and thank you so much for, taking time. I know as you've been juggling life, you still make time to write, which is wonderful. And to just whether and a lot of it's just a lot of wonderful opportunities to just take some of that knowledge and that experience that you've had and share it with the outer world. And I do know that you're also dipping into like fiction a little, so we'll get into that.
Yeah, I'll tell you about that.
Yeah.
I'm sort of an inveterate scribbler. I like writing. Writing has been my way of integrating and connecting a lot of dots and thinking out loud. So I've done it for a long time and I enjoy it. Although I get frustrated sometimes, just as like every writer. But anyway, yeah,
Well, the way I look at it is, I think there's great power in introspection and reflection in this field of ADR, dispute, conflict resolution, conflict management, whatever folks call it. Um, and I find this so many times. Wait, is Peter just writing his journals and making books out of these? Because that's really what it kind of feels like. And so thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us, though. But we'll start with the basics and how, as we look to talk about consensus seeking today, how do you define consensus seeking?
yeah. Basically it's the search for agreement. Consensus seeking is all about trying to find agreement. And it's so particularly important and poignant in this day and age, which is we're living in a very dangerous time. And, there's just a lot going on and a lot of violence and a lot of hurt and a lot of negativity. And so I think I consider agreement and consensus to be the coin of the realm. It's what people struggle to do. And as a species, we've always struggled to figure this out and figured out how not to make war all the time, but how to not to compete all the time. How do we reach agreements that have enduring and sustainable feet and legs? So it's basically agreement seeking. It's another way of thinking about agreement. And I do consider it to be one of the most critical things that we can do, that leaders can do. And we'll talk more about that. But um, I just, politically, socially, environmentally, every which way you think, we need to find ways of reaching agreement. And it's not simple. It's very challenging, which is part of the reason why people like you and I and other few of our friends do this, because we like it. And we're not afraid of the conflict. We're trying to figure out ways to manage it and help people move up on some scale of reaching agreement. And there are many different levels of agreement and consensus building, but it's vital to the health of our work. You know, Sun Tzu, the famous Art of War guy, talked about the highest strategy is what he called the sheath sword that never gets used. And that kind of summarizes it for me. I mean, we do a lot of things. Negotiation, it can be tense and it can be difficult, and there are moves and power moves. But at the end of the day, we're trying to find ways to come to an agreement. And that's consensus. It's just one of those. It's another word for agreement.
No, thank you. Thank you. And you talked a little bit about leadership. Might you unpack the idea that leadership itself can be seen as a form of consensus seeking?
Yes. Yeah, I think leadership, in fact, I want to share with you a little bit about some of how I think they're related. Because we don't think of them quite
Yeah.
that way in the dispute resolution world. But think about it this way, as mediators or as leaders who are skillful, good leaders. I mean, there's a lot of crummy leaders too, by the way.
And
But
maybe that's why people can't see the connection between the two.
that's fine. But think about what's in common. Good mediators, good leaders know how to ask skillful questions.
Yeah.
They know how to look around the corner and see alternatives. They know how to influence the trajectory of some problem-solving effort in positive ways. And there may be negative steps along the ways, but at the end, they're looking for positives. Leaders and mediators, and I'm using mediation and facilitation all conflated. I don't parse it out too particularly. But we also know, they know, good leaders know that one-sided solutions that are imposed very often are frail and they won't last very long. We know how to study a problem. Leaders know how to study a problem. We know a lot about negotiation and the running triangle between positions and interests and psychological satisfactions. And we know plenty about ripeness and BATNAs and the deadlines. So I think that I've always begun to see the commonalities here. And I've been in the position of being a leader and a CEO of a number of enterprises. And I really like doing the mediation work that helps others get there, if I can do it. It's kind of a long-winded answer, but to me, they're very linked up.
No, no, thank you. And I could definitely see, yeah, if we had better examples of good leaders, then it would be an easier bridge to make that. Yes, I completely agree. Now, you've worked in some pretty high stakes, high conflict environments. How does consensus show up or fall apart at that level? How do you find that? It's like it feels like a needle in a haystack almost.
Um, I've been blessed by getting entree into a number of thorny problems. And I've been particularly drawn to complex political problems and policy issues. And I've worked in a number of different settings on a number of different issues. I'll give you just some examples, and some of which you know. I mean, I worked, for example, on some really tough uh, GMO pesticide issues on Kauai. Took a long time, and we were very focused on trying to sort through fact and fiction. I worked on a lot of geothermal issues on the Big Island. I'm working on some water issues right now in the Kona area. I spent a long time working in Papua New Guinea on a one of the world's worst mine contamination cases, and in a place called Octeti. And usually I've been asked to come in. I've sometimes offered help, but usually I've been asked. I've been somehow people connected with me. How that happens is always usually strange circumstances. But once I'm in, and I will work like a dog, a devil to get it done and to try and help people go as possibly far as they can towards reaching agreements. And when it works, when it's a great day, it works. And sometimes, there's a bad day and it doesn't work so well, but that's just how she goes.
I think that really speaks to your testament of not only building rapport, trust, community, relationships, because what you just shared that, you don't know how it comes to you, but I imagine it comes to you from folks that have worked with you in the past. And so they,
Sometimes it's just the
oh yeah,
odd angles. It happens in odd ways.
it's a small world.
Let me mention one other thing about this leadership connection with the search for agreement.
Hmm.
One of the films I do training, as you've done training and given talks, and I still do this. And one of the film, I love using film clips in a lot of the work that I do as a trainer or as a teacher. Um, One of the films I use a lot, just a short clip, is from the movie Invictus. And I don't know if you know that movie, but it's about Nelson Mandela. and the captain of the Springbok team, which is played by Matt Damon. And there's a conversation they have about leadership, and Mandela invites Matt Damon, Francois Pinard was the guy's name. This is a real story. He invites him in to just have a talk, and he's got a secret agenda. Mandela really wants to both get the Springboks to be a powerful team, and they're not that great. They're sort of mediocre, but they have this conversation. It's a conversation about leadership, and what they talk about is how do we get people to do more and be more than they think they can be? How do we get people to do more and be more than they think they can accomplish? And it's one of those moments when you say, isn't that kind of what we do in some of our dispute resolution work and conflict management work? And isn't that what a good leader does? He tries to mobilize people and get them to do more than they possibly think they really can. And in bureaucracies and in companies, everybody's got their own motives and they got their own, constellation of issues. But how do you get them working together and doing more than they think they can possibly do? It's a very powerful little film clip, and I use it a lot, and I love it, because I think it springboards into lots of important areas that leaders are interested in, and dispute resolution people are interested in.
No, thank you. I do recall watching that video a couple times in your presentation, so thank you. Um, what would you say is the difference between leading by authority versus leading through consensus?
Good question. It's a really good question. And I don't know that there's a simple answer to it. I was a CEO of the Keystone Center for almost 10 years. And I was wooed away. I thought I was just going to be there for 3 years to rebuild a program. And I wound up staying on when the guy who hired me got fired, and the board asked me to stay on. And so I was an accidental CEO and president of about a 40-person company. And we were spread out. We had a lot of work in Washington, D.C. Nationally, it was all about policy consensus building and facilitation. That was the main thing. We also had a science school, but there were kind of several little sub businesses that we had. And as a CEO, I had to exercise authority. One of the things that leaders have to do, one of the powerful things that leaders must do is make decisions. They must make decisions. If you're not working, in a place where you're exercising leadership, you're kind of lucky. You don't have to worry about that stuff. But as a CEO or as a president or as the head of a unit, you have to ultimately come to decision. It's all in how you do it. I think part of the trick, and if you will, and it doesn't always work, is to invite a lot of communication, a lot of consultation, but not carry it on forever, and take advice. And sometimes it's turning over things to other people and letting them decide for themselves. I don't have to decide everything. When I was a CEO, people came to me with, I'd say, what color cup should we have for the organization? I said, I don't care. You decide that. You go talk to a few other people, straighten it out. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. I'll drink out of any cup. So, sometimes it's letting other people do things and not micromanaging them. And sometimes it's about really taking the important issues and really what's up now and trying to make headway on it strategically. And I've read a lot about leadership. There's a lot of really interesting literature out there and a lot of ideas. So I think it's a rich one. And I think people who are skilled in bringing people together to communicate, to talk, to solve problems, to negotiate, I think those are skills that good leaders have very often.
No, thank
I
you.
don't know if
Thank
that
you.
answered your question, but
No,
let
no,
me know.
yeah. Um, I was gonna ask, are there specific risks when leaders rely too much on consensus? Such as like, what's the balance between like inclusion and decisiveness?
Yeah, and yes, and I think sometimes if you carry it on too much, and you don't come to a conclusion, I think it can be painful in many different ways, whether it's be financially or organizationally or programmatically or morale-wise. So I think, remember, if decision at the end of the day, the part of the leadership is make role is making decisions, but all the run up to that decision has a lot of opportunities for bringing people together or letting other people decide for themselves. So I think you got to make decisions at the end of the day. You may not like it. And one of the challenges I found was there were decisions that I sometimes had to make that I couldn't consult people with because they were executive decisions or they had personnel implications or they had, and people and I'm working with a whole group of mediators and they say, oh, well, we want to talk with you about everything. And I said, well, there's some things I can't talk with you about. And what? What is that? You're keeping things from us. I said, well, sorry, but here's all the things we can talk about, but this one I can't because X, Y, Z reasons.
Do you turn to your moral compass at that point?
Absolutely.
That's about that gut
Absolutely.
feeling. That's about all you can do at that point.
That's right. I mean, that moral compass is also one of your holdfasts and one of your anchors.
Yeah,
And it's not the one for every moment, but at the end of the day, it's pretty critical. And if you abandon that, then you'll get yourself in a lot of trouble.
yes.
I was involved in trying to negotiate a merger that involved some of a unit from another organization that were actually competitors and collaborators sometimes. And we had one whole unit from that other group that wanted to come over and work for me. And I couldn't talk about that to everybody. I just couldn't talk about why, you know, and they wanted to know more. And I said, I can't talk about it. I will talk with you about it at the right time.
Yeah.
So anyway, there's something about, not everything can be done in huddles and, full light of day, but you can do a lot. You can do more. Yeah.
That's no, most definitely. I wonder if you might share or talk about a time when consensus seeking leadership maybe backfired or simply wasn't the right tool.
Yeah. And it's interesting in the book that I just came out with, Calming the Storm, I talk about one of those cases and one of the cases where I made a big mistake. And I'll tell you the short version of the longer story. I met a guy from Malaysia who was wanted to try to create a kind of a mediation on a big, very tough issue in one of the provinces. There were Australian miners who were digging up rare earth materials, lithium and all that, and they wanted to bring it into Malaysia and process it in the eastern side of Malaysia, Kuantan province. And so this guy said, Peter, I'd like you to help organize two other people, including a former Chief Justice from Papua New Guinea and one of our old colleagues, Ken Lowry, who's I'm so sad because he was such a close friend. But we did that. And we went in and we flew in and we started talking with government officials and we started talking with community people who flew out to the province. But we didn't talk to the miners in Australia who actually owned the process. And so they were the last one on our list, and they should have been the first ones on our list. They should have been number one to talk with them and begin to say, would you like to negotiate some better arrangements with the community that is really pissed? They're really mad at you. They're afraid of this project. They're afraid of being radiated by this. And we should have had enough sense to go contact the Australian miners first and talk to the government people and the community people second. Because at the end, the community people and the government said, yeah, we're ready to come to the table. And the miners said, no, we don't want to do that. So that was really, it's actually was our failing, our mistake. We did some good work in between then, and we helped them really do some thinking. But it's an example where our notion of how you achieve consensus really was a bit flawed in that moment. I mean, one of the things we got to do is a good examination of our own problems and cases. We got to do pathology on our own work.
That's so true. And rarely does the environment allow for that just because it's like one project, okay, move on to the next project. And it's not as though there's a time of the year when things are calm. for conflict. People don't take vacation. They're like, we're going to get along. Yeah,
Well, we have a tendency to not want to talk about the mistakes we've made.
yeah,
I mean, that's pretty human. Yeah, I mean, doctors have to go through a lot of self-examination.
yeah.
Lawyers do a little bit of it. CPAs have to do it when they get audited, especially.
Mm.
We don't do that much of that. And it doesn't feel safe to do it. That's part of the reason. Say, well, I don't want people to think I'm not very good. I can't admit these mistakes. But that's exactly what we need to be doing.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like, a company is they rather settle than admit a mistake. And in this case, with practitioners, um, there's not a large company. It's just many times them. And so admitting to that mistake
Yep.
it's their livelihood, basically. It could
Yeah.
be
Right.
the end. Yeah, I could see.
Jose, I'm looking at my head on this thing.
Yeah.
Just got a haircut and it looks like I just got out of prison. So
No, no, not
yeah,
at all.
you look like a convict. Next time
No,
I'm
it
gonna look
looks
for
like you
the
just
hair
came
goes on.
back from, active duty training or something.
Oh yeah, worse yet, boot camp or
Yeah, boot
something.
camp. There you go.
Anyway, I'm just realizing I
It
got
looks great.
scalped by the barber this time.
Uh-oh. Oh. Well, getting back to practical techniques and insights a little bit, how can leaders actually build consensus in groups with deep disagreement, especially on technical or emotional issues? It's
Well, one of the practices, first of all, in the work that we do, there's a lot of slicing and dicing into these kind of different packages of mediation, whether it's evaluative and facilitative and narrative. And I mean, everybody's got their little school, and some of them are rather cultish, I think. And I tend to be pretty eclectic. I'm really interested in what works in what given circumstance. It means you got to be a little diagnostic, and which is not always the easiest thing to do. But I personally think that one of the value disputes, the deep value disputes are very sometimes they're deep and sometimes they're not so deep. Sometimes they're important but less important. I mean, when someone says it's the principle of everything that's driving me, principled fights are difficult. They're very difficult. They're very ideological or religious but a lot of times there are people who do hold different values. And but sometimes there's a lot of technical and factual problems. What can we and so one of the practices that's in my folder, one folder, is really what we'll call joint fact finding, where you get parties together and you really try to streamline and narrow the areas of factual disagreement. And that can be a portal into the larger question. Doesn't solve things by itself. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it just triggers a lot of conversation and a lot of agreement. But I know, I've done that on those GMO issues on Kauai, did it in Chinatown on some issues there that we're struggling with in the Chinatown area on alcoholism and holidays and whatnot. And I've done it a couple times. And there are a lot of different ways to do it. I like doing it because I think it forces people to confront what I'll call evidence. People make an assertion and you say, well, what's your evidence of that assertion? And but it doesn't necessarily by itself resolve the differences, because that is where the very often as negotiators, we know that there are different interests, and sometimes they're very subtle. Interests are in play. And personal satisfaction, psychological satisfaction is a little different from interest, and those come into play. So, but I like sometimes really zeroing in, especially when I work on a water issue or a geothermal issue, or, because everybody's using the science as a sword or a shield in their fight. And the question is, can we put those down and see if we can narrow the range of disagreement? Not as a final, it won't lead you to the final solution. It won't lead you to the right policy outcome or the right political outcome, but it becomes a starting point. And I found it to be pretty effective in many situations.
Thank you. I wonder, as you're getting folks to find consensus, what might be some early signs that it's actually forming, or that maybe it's just doomed, like it's not going to happen? Are there key tells, or every 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 situation is a new rodeo, basically a new adventure you're going on?
It's right. Think about search for consensus on some sliding scale. And at the bottom of it is, do people at least agree on a new definition or the best definition of the problem? That's that's one. There's another level that says, can they agree to continue to investigate that problem? There's another level that says, would they be willing to meet again and stick with it and sustain a dialogue? There's yet another level that says, can they reach some agreements in principle, broad statements that, framework kind of things. And then there are agreements in detail, really worked out, very specific roadmaps. So I think of these as levels. And when you're sitting there in conversation and you're talking with people and they've had a chance to talk through what's on their mind and the histories as they need to speak to it, we begin to see which one of these might be most feasible. And sometimes I'll just ask people, say, look, we've been at it for a couple hours. You willing to pause on this, think about things, and come back next week and talk some more? Yeah, okay, we do that. Yeah, this has been, and by the way, there's sometimes also when it's really smart not to spend in really high conflict situations. I'm not always so sure that it's right to keep going back over the past. I sometimes will ask people, in a high conflict situation, what's your best proposal? Let's go right to it. Let's get to the heart of this thing. What is your best proposal for finding a solution? Because in really high conflict, where people have been fighting with each other in a very systematic ways for a long time, they may think they know everything about everybody's history. And sometimes they do. Sometimes they actually do. They're repeat players in a conflict. So sometimes, it may be, but these are just really decisions you make in the process of doing that. And a lot of it is trying to gather information at the head, ahead of time before you actually bring them together for a conversation. I very rarely will ever, just go in cold and just start from scratch. I got to know what's going on privately with each of them.
Yeah, what's the backstory? Because if there's somebody in the group that's like divorced, you're like, oh great, this is gonna carry on. One brief example right there, but
I'll give you a really interesting example. I do a lot of this consensus work in the context of strategic positioning and planning. A company calls up and says, we need a plan. And sometimes the auditor said, we need a plan and we need a plan. And sometimes I have to really do some archaeology and excavate about why they need a plan, what they're going to do with it, to understand how to help them. So I had a situation some years ago where I was approached and it was very clear there was something, it wasn't clear why they needed a plan. And finally, I sort of persisted in asking. And finally, I got the truth. The truth was, we want to fire our director and we need to tell him he doesn't fit in our new plan. Okay, so now I understand what's really motivating them. And the director's going to be involved in the planning, but isn't it good to understand what the reality of that is? And it's not the only reality because everybody else has realities. But sometimes, you just got to do a bit of archaeology at the front end, as you know, because otherwise you're going in blind. I've also, there were back in the day, and you've had this experience, somebody will call you and say, we're going to have a really nasty meeting next week and we need a facilitator. And, I mean, I just stopped doing that. I said, no, don't call me, call somebody else. Because I want to interview the key thought leaders who are going to be involved in that. Oh, we don't have time, we don't have money, we don't have this, we don't, blah, blah, blah. And I
recipe for disaster
just,
right there.
I just don't do walk-ons. I just
Yeah,
don't do
this isn't stand-up comedy.
it. I mean, that, they may want something like that just to do crowd management, and that
Yeah, it's
it's
and
just
many
not
times
what I want to
it's
do.
just so that they can like check off a box on
Well, that's right. That's
well,
even
well,
worse.
well we did everything, that we're required to do,
Or they said, we're required to bring in a facilitator.
right?
We're required to have one.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't want I've reached a certain stage in my life where I'm kind of impatient. I don't want to mess around with bullshit. So I want to work on things where people actually have a chance and sort of want to find some solution.
That's
Sometimes
great.
they get talked into it and it's reluctant. I've worked on a lot of litigation matters and people are very careful and cautious, and usually lots of lawyers involved, and that's okay.
So with bringing in lawyers into the conversation, next question is about holdouts. How do you handle holdouts like that 5-10% of people who never get on board, even when the rest of the group has moved forward? Not to say that lawyers are the ones that are holding out, but
Yeah,
sometimes.
they may be or they may not be.
Yeah.
Um, you know, what in the I worked in the Supreme Court for a while, worked on a lot of litigation cases and ones that are multi-party cases. And sometimes what the lawyers want to do and will do is say, okay, we're going to collapse the case around that person. We're going to reach agreements and they're left out. And they may still be unhappy and sue us and do all kinds of things, but we're going to go ahead and reach an agreement among the 10 of us, even though number 11 says, I don't want to have anything to do with it. Made their decisions. So, and as a mediator, I'll try and figure out ways to keep the door open if they want to jump on later on. And I've seen that happen. But there are global settlements and then there are less than global settlements to multi-party problems. So that, I mean, sometimes that person is so key that it collapses the case. You can't go any further. But very often, I've seen a couple, been involved in a few where one person is standing off and the others say, we'll go ahead. Privately, they'll tell me that. Okay, we're going to work out an agreement. We're going to work out a written agreement. And number 11 is not going to be part of it unless they choose to come on at the last minute. And I've seen that happen too. And number 11 ultimately says, okay, I'll sign on. So you never know how it's all going to roll.
That's what keeps it entertaining, exciting, and looking
It
forward to the
is,
next one, I
isn't it?
guess.
Isn't it interesting? I mean, I have always told people if you like human drama and you like Shakespeare and you like soap opera, you're gonna love this kind of work.
I will say it is never a dull moment. You just
Right,
gotta get comfortable with pivoting. That's
right. That's right.
what's it all about. And I will say that recently I was reflecting upon how with everything that's going on nationwide, internationally, ongoing conflicts and war, famine, and the list goes on and on. Um, I find it fascinating how interpersonal conflicts don't go away. Like the day
Right.
to day, it's just, oh, here's the routine again. It's
It's amazing. And what I have this growing, I don't know if you share that with me, but I have this sense that we're living in more and more dangerous times. More and more dangerous. I mean, you know, it's egged on by strange leadership behavior by some people. I mean, the assassination attempts on presidents and on the Kentucky highway shooters, and even in our own stuff in Waianae, where families have just, tried to kill each other, and road rage or the threats that people are eating their pets and that kind of, I mean, just crazy stuff. So I keep wanting to bring a little bit of sensibility and sanity to some of this stuff if I can. But
yeah.
that's I can't, I mean, I can only work on what's close to me.
No, no, and I mean I always talk about, shifting our perspective to in a way, I become appreciative of the life I'm living and I understand the privilege that I have in comparison to everything else out there. And but yeah, just interpersonal conflicts or roommate issues, they never go away. It's just part of human nature and just constantly we're trying to figure out how to coexist and find that consensus.
Be lucky to live in a place that is comparatively safe and calm
Right.
compared to so many other places.
Right.
But in here, I see a lot of that kind of a fraying of the social networks and the social contract, and a lot of that may be just because of Trump right now, and it will. I'm confident it will eventually pass. That we've been through these things as an American society, so I remain pretty optimistic that it
I,
will pass.
I do hear from a lot of folks that are true historians that this is a cycle we're going through.
That's right.
Unfortunately.
Yep, exactly right, and I think that too. And
Wow.
we've had previous periods, Andrew Jackson era, uh, Joe McCarthy
Yeah,
House American Committee in the 50s, the Father Conklin in the 30s, 20s, and 30s. We've had these kind of despots who've risen up. And there's something about America that, and periodically attracts that kind of a thing out of all kind of frustration. But we're a tough society. We're split. We're really jammed right now. And anything we can do to begin to lower the level of conflict and begin to improve the levels of agreement and consensus, I think is worth doing, worth trying.
most definitely. As you're talking about consensus, I keep thinking about bridge building. Would you say it's the same or would you say it's a little different?
Well, it depends on how you mean it, but I use that word, I use that phrase, talk
Okay.
about, yeah.
Well, I find that in the work that I've been doing is I find that folks there's a lot of wonderful people that get so skilled in whatever area of expertise they're in, which is wonderful. And they keep pushing knowledge forward. But unfortunately, a result of that is the isolation and the blinders, like the horse with the blinders, and you don't see how there's opportunities to collaborate with other folks so close by or even not so close by. And so, um, and I find that many times I am in the space where, as I'm talking to different groups and different folks, I'm the one making that bridge. I'm like, oh, have you thought about this? Or have you? And they're like, no, because I've just been focusing on, studying this one item. And and as I'm hearing you talk about consensus and obviously more within like the environment, public policy sector, I wonder if you come across a similar experience.
I think you're right. It's a good metaphor. You can imagine two people on different sides of a canyon, and each of them saying, "Well, you come over to my side." No, no, you come over to my side. Otherwise, how can we talk? And at some point, you have to build some kind of a pathway across where they can begin to move incrementally towards something that where they could, reach some agreements of whether it's smaller or bigger. That's fine. So bridge building is a fine metaphor for what we do, and we try to do it in many different ways. Um, so I like it. I think it's a perfect metaphor.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah,
no, I like it. Yeah,
trying to you know connect because many times we think of consensus building and I think folks might think of it, it's like, oh, okay, this is more for like if I go into high stakes. And I think we can all do this on so many levels. Honestly, many times I ask folks like, do you know your neighbors? If you don't know your neighbors, there's a start right there. Get to know them. You don't have to be best friends, but at least know, when they're in town, when they're not in town, that kind of stuff.
it's fun. It's funny. You're reminded me of lots of interesting little incidents and stories. Years and years ago, I was asked to bring together a group of people, and this is when I was working in the court system. And I brought this group together, and they were fighting over. It was a big water controversy, and there were maybe 8, 10 different players in there, and all organizations that you would recognize. The attorney general's involved, and the Commission on Water Resource Management's involved, and the counties are involved, and everybody, and there's lots of advocacy groups that are involved. So I mentioned I talk a little bit about this in the book, Calming the Storm at the end, especially because Kem did some evaluation work on this. And so I remember in the meeting, I opened the door and I brought people in and I said, I know everybody's charged up and ready to talk about the water issues, and I promise you we'll get to that. But before we do that, we're sitting in a little bit of a circle. And I said, why don't you everybody explain your name? Just tell us what your name, where it comes from, and what it means. And of course, the Hawaiian person said, well, they start reciting their genealogy and they can recite it back 150 years, 200 years. And then, the guy from Japan says, my people were plantation people. And every time they do that, they're creating little insights into each other. And, then there's some redheaded Irish guy saying, oh, I don't know how I got my name. I don't know where it came from. So what happens is, and it was actually just an icebreaker, let's call it that.
I call them
And
centering activities, but yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
years later, Kem Lowry was doing some evaluation of some of the work and the cases that I'd done myself. And he goes back and he interviews some of the people on this. And he says, what do you remember about that? So we don't remember anything except we turned on the lights, brought some cookies, and asked us what our name meant. They can't remember anything else except we came to an agreement. They remember nothing else. And here I'm thinking about all my cool negotiation moves and my suave trickery and all that
Yeah.
stuff. They don't remember diddly shit. They just remember about the lights, the cookies, and the name. That's it.
And you know what though? In many I've used that centering activity a couple of times, like story of your name. Uh Rarely do folks have an opportunity to share that.
Right,
Many times they don't even do that in like their households. So to do it in
right.
the workplace is like so you left a mark. And those cookies must have been really good too.
But what if it takes a half hour? I mean, big deal
Yeah.
in the context of a 10-year water dispute. So what?
Yeah, no,
But it's just interesting because they reached an agreement. They reached all kinds of agreements, but that's what they recall. They don't recall anything else about who said what and did what and was there how
I, I
they.
I look at it also as it's a negotiation strategy right there because I always share that, if folks have a built-in relationship, it's a little bit harder to walk away from that conflict. And by them getting to know each other a little bit better than, just this name on the plaque, you're somehow connected and you never know where the bridge is between those folks. Because when I do that activity, I share about, the evolution of reclaiming my name, having, being an immigrant and having to chop up my name and trying to reclaim my original pronunciation of my name, and adding the accent to my name. And there will always be a trigger for somebody in the room. Someone one time was like, I also just started using the accent on my name, or like, I also just started feeling comfortable to start pronouncing it in its original format, or, you know, so once more, that relationship building, the bridge building. And so when it comes to coming together around whatever the issue is, it's like, yeah, yeah, okay, you got it.
Well, at least they're going to talk a little bit more humanly with each other.
Which that's the other thing I'm learning is that rarely do folks have the opportunity to just like talk to each other because there's so many agendas. There's always people are coming together and there's an agenda. And many times, unfortunately, I hear that, oh, that could have just been an email. We didn't need to sit around for an hour plus to hear someone just check this off their
And
list.
Jose, it's especially true when it's in the context of lawsuits because that's when people really squeeze down and don't talk to each other because it's dangerous to talk to each other. So it needs that third party structured place to do
Yeah.
that with some ground rules and some safety.
Yeah.
Because litigation, once the lawsuits start, it's a killer of communication. They won't talk, they can't talk with each other for a lot of reasons.
Oh, and we live in such a high law. Everyone's suing all the time in the US
Yep.
on
Yep.
all levels of
Oh.
authority. So shifting a little back to consensus seeking, I'm wondering if you might share in complex systems, or multiple stakeholder negotiations that those that involve science, policy, public interest. What exactly does good consensus look like in those
Well,
capacities?
it can look like 20 different things depending on the circumstances. But I do think, I always think about it as kind of narrowing the conflict. And streamlining. Even if there aren't agreements, can we streamline this and say, okay, we're not going to fight about all these things, we're going to fight about these things? Or can we make procedural agreements about how we're going to communicate and talk with each other during the pendency of this litigation? Or, there's just a lot of different ways. We're about to work on I'm working on a project right now. It's a very difficult project on water issues. And it's one where everybody thinks they're the smartest person in the room and has the biggest opinion. I mean, and they're all really smart. And I kind of want to tell them, you're all right. You're right, and you're right.
Lucky
And
you.
yeah. But what I find myself doing is kind of border collie work. I'm trying to rope them in and do, it's not crowd control because it's much more subtle than that. But it's really trying to shape and ask people, let's see if we can't narrow down and get down to the critical few things that you really need to focus on. Because you can drag everything in. You can conflate everything with everything. And that's easy to do. That's very easy to do. Linda Colburn and I used to laugh and say that when we were finally retired, we were just going to become meeting mashers, and because we know how to destroy every meeting that you want.
Retire.
Oh yeah.
I feel like
Yeah. I mean, I could just bust up a meeting in many different ways. I
yes,
should write a book on how to bust up meetings. So
love it. Look forward to
no, but I mean, it's just you know, it's so I find myself being a border collie, trying to rope everybody in and get them in the same zone, getting everybody moving. I don't mean to suggest they're sheep because they're not,
it.
but you know what I'm talking about. It's
Yeah.
trying to sort of narrow. Can we narrow this down
You're a
so that
gatherer. You're a gatherer. You're just trying
that's
to
right?
gather folks together.
Yeah,
That's all.
because everybody wants to bring up new issues and bring in more things.
Yeah.
And Mark Twain said, "Whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting." So yeah, I mean, it's always water fights are very tough because it's so close. The vai is so close to what's needed. It's water is absolutely essential, and it's wealth. It's the basic form of wealth. Anyway, I can get going on
No,
that
no,
stuff.
thank you. Thank you. I wonder, is consensus always desirable in technical or scientific disputes? Or are there times when it might be a distraction?
Well, I don't know if it's a distraction, but I think one of the realities is that conflict has good functions. And in science, I mean, my training's mainly in sociology and planning, but I actually started out thinking I was going to be an aquatic biologist. So I studied science, took a lot of anatomy and comparative anatomy and basic biology classes, and got interested in a lot of it. But I still have this interest. And so part of the scientific method is to actually have competing ideas and test those things empirically. And that's healthy, that's useful. Um, it can get carried away, get crazy, but it is the raw way new information comes into being. And you say, I have a hypothesis, and I have a hypothesis. And by the way, my comparative biology teacher was really good. Always used to say, always develop at least two different hypotheses. And so you develop your own theory of the case or theory of what's going on. And then you're trying to test those against metrics and countable realities. Not that everything can be counted. I'm not under that illusion, but so it's healthy. And so one of the questions is, for example, in some disputes is, can we agree on what the core next step research question is that would help shed light and inform a decision? What would we do that? I'm doing that on actually a couple of cases. What can we agree, rather than you running off and you running off, if we were to bring in a third party and they're going to do some additional research that would help solve this problem, what would we ask them to do? What would we have them do? So there's conflict, but it's managed conflict. And I have a friend of mine, Howard Gadlin, who's well known in his field, and he used to work with the National Institutes of Health. And one of the things he did was he would help big science teams develop what he called sort of prenuptial agreements about how they're going to manage stuff. Yeah, because what would happen is they all get excited and then they have these big fights later on and the team doesn't work very well. So he's actually developed lots of cool methods for helping groups that are in science. They're science. These are scientists. These are medical scientists and cancer researchers and the best guys on knee replacements. And they have these teams. They get a big grant. They're all excited, and it's the honeymoon period of the grant. And he has learned to help them reach some fundamental agreements that look very similar to what you and I do. Very similar. So I think there's a lot. One of the reasons why this is such an interesting area of work is, I mean, when Howard does that, I think he's acting as a leader. He's doing a very subtle leadership function. But he's not saying, I'm the leader, listen to me. He's helping work with the other leaders.
That's amazing. That's great. Would you say what are some of the most common myths or misunderstandings about consensus?
Well, that's another interesting question, and it's hard to answer. I think one of them is that consensus is fluffy. It's fluffy stuff. It's, I was talking to some lawyer at UH Law School once, and he was, I'm trying to remember what he called
They
it.
called it fluffy.
He called it negotiation hokey pokey. It's, a lot of bullshit. Now, they're always interested in complexity, and I'm interested in trying to bring about agreement. So I think one of the myths, one of the criticisms is this is all, fluffy stuff, lightweight. It won't last. It's not sturdy, not sustainable. And so I think that's one of the criticisms I think I've heard. And I remember a certain person who was the head of one of the state of Hawaii departments who used to tell me this is all, kind of fluffy stuff. And now she's doing it herself because she says, no, I've discovered some really good, powerful stuff in there. And so, maybe people just have to go through that and apply it in very specific ways at specific times. But I think one of the criticisms is that it won't sustain, it doesn't hold up, it doesn't, it's sweet and nice, but it's like the age of Aquarius or something like that.
Well, thank you. Going back to, I know we talked a little bit about consent, decisiveness and consensus. Uh, what advice might you give to emerging leaders who want to lead with a consensus-driven approach? Is that,
Well, I think it's all in the how.
yeah,
After I was this accidental CEO at Keystone, it took me a while to decompress from that. It took me a while, and I wrote a piece that I've used in some different circumstances, and it's called "Being in Charge." And what I've learned is that the decisiveness is really important, but the how you do it, how you get there, and what are the steps you do. And some people don't have any patience for it. They say, you just got to decide it. Tell us, make a decision. Well, I'm going to make a decision and half of you are going to get fired. You're not going to like that. So there's a stage setting. So I think decision making balanced with the right consultation and engagement by the right people at the right time is quite critical. But they're related. I mean, I just, it's like pulling pieces together so that you can get to a decision that is reasoned and sticks.
thank you. Do you think consensus seeking is something that can be taught, or is it more of just a mindset that you
You can give people some counsel on it and advice. I don't know if you can automatically teach. Not everybody's open to it either.
That's true. That's very true.
I mean, I don't want to spend my time trying to teach people who don't want to do it. So the first thing is getting people interested and curious. And usually that starts with a problem. Somebody has a problem. They're
Mm,
facing an issue. They're facing a problem. And, as you unpack the problem and you start to say, what are some ways that you might approach solving that problem organizationally?
yeah.
That's when I think you capture their interest. But just holding it out there as a general thing, I think people need to talk,
Yeah.
think about it in their very own personal contexts.
Oh, thank you. Going back a little bit to let's call it the polarization that's happening lately. Um, what gives you hope about leadership through consensus?
Well, I think the right leaders at the right time will overcome the period that we're in. We're in a bad time. We're in a very painful, difficult time. There's a lot of overt lying going on. There's a lot of misleading going on. And, you don't have to be, and it's not just in Trump. It's not just Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. I mean, there's a lot of this obfuscation that goes on. I'm rereading a book. It's really interesting when you think about national politics and local politics, and it's called Our Towns, and it's by the Fallows, by James and Deborah Fallows, very good journalists. And they did a thing where they spent almost a couple years flying in and looking in small cities and small towns. They didn't go to Chicago, New York, LA, the usual places. They'd go into, Sioux City Falls or, Burlington, Vermont. And they were writers for the Atlantic Monthly. And what they would do is they wanted to find out what was going on in these little places. Was it the same as the national stuff? Was the national issues and the national mood the same as what was going on locally? And they were really surprised because they would pop into these towns and they would start asking. They're journalists, the mediators are good like that. They ask questions. We ask questions. And so they would come in and they'd say, what are you dealing with in this town? And who's making things happen? And who should we talk to find out about the soul of the town? And they would spend a week or 3 days or 4 days. And they did this it actually was 4 years. They spent flying around. They had their own airplane. So they would fly around in small towns. It's a really interesting book because what they found was their kind of the America that they were looking at in these smaller places very different than what you would see on CNN and MSNBC and Fox News. I mean, there were people who were much more, not everybody, but they found a lot of civic-minded people who were really doing really important things in their own place. Very often had to do with schools, very often had to do with roads and with immigration, but they were grappling with the same issues that the big shots talk about nationally, but they were making real headway in these little towns. And so it's such an interesting, it's called Our Towns by the Fallows, Fallows. It's really a remarkable book. And I read it years ago and I'm rereading it in the context of some things I'm thinking about these days. Excuse me.
Oh no, thank you. I want to shift a little to your book. Calming the Storm, a leader's handbook for managing unproductive conflicts. Now, there are many books out there on conflict resolution, so just wondering what inspired you to write this one and how is it different, and who is the audience that you're writing for?
Well, I wrote this book because I wanted to try to take what we know and what we have learned and repackage it for people who are in leadership positions who actually want to do this. I don't have any delusion that somebody like J.D. Vance or Donald Trump are going to read this and
Hey,
be in.
now
I think
it'll be out there. Maybe they'll be like, well, I'll show
who
you.
knows? You never know. But I have a sense that there are younger people who are in their mid careers who are moving up the leadership chains, and I wanted to try to bring some of what we know to them in practical advice. And I also tell a lot of stories in there, lots of stories, big stories and small stories. Small stories about work that I've done, and big stories that are very influential. They're like meta stories about conflict. And so I wanted to try and get this out there, and it's gotten, well received. It's not going to be a bestseller. You won't see it on the New York Times bestseller list, but I think it's been really interesting to try and go through this. I had a couple of people help me with some editing on it, and they were great. And I take editing very well, so I've enjoyed writing. I enjoyed it. Like I said, I'm an inveterate scribbler, so I like to write. So it was a project.
Well, never say never. Maybe we'll hear it on the news. One of the announcements that may be good or bad publicity. Well,
What I just did, I've just finished a novel. I've written about 5 books, but they were all nonfiction.
yes.
But during the real dark days of COVID, Trump won, and the politics that was going on, I started experimenting and say, could I write a piece of fiction in my spare time? And I started experimenting. And so I've written a novel, which is just going to come out in February. And it's called The Duck Brings Defiance. And it's really, it takes, yeah, it's a funny little thing. And it's about, it takes place about 10, 15 years in the future as a second civil war is erupting in the United States. And it's about a small town and centered on one guy and his relationship with this little town. And they, for a lot of reasons, this little town gets attacked by the what's going on in this civil war, and it's about defiance. And it's got a good ending. It's got Anyway, I had a lot of fun writing it, so it'll be out in.
What inspired this? You just wanted to try something new?
Well, I started doodling around trying to write a short piece of fiction, and then I'm kind of enjoying writing it, so I made it longer. And then I set it aside and re-edited it and did a lot of things with it.
Oh, I look forward to reading it when it comes out. How
Well,
exciting.
I'll
It
be
sounds like it
interested.
would make for a good script for a movie too.
It's a cautionary tale. It's really a cautionary tale. I will send you the summary of it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have a
Look
two
forward.
paragraphs.
Well, Peter, it's always a joy and an honor. Um, this brings us to the end of today's episode, but I just want to have a heartfelt thank you, Peter, for sharing, your deep wisdom, decades of experience, such amazing insights on consensus seeking as a form of leadership and leadership as an act of building consensus. You truly remind us of the importance of really, I mean, we didn't say it, but humility, curiosity, courage in navigating complex challenges. And I think that's truly what I love about it. It's like, if anybody out there listening has curiosity about life and just, hey, this is a really good area for you to kind of delve into if you've never considered it. Yeah, so if anything resonates, encourage you to reflect on your own leadership, whether in your community, your workplace, personal relationships. And I think when I tried to make the connection between consensus and bridge building, I'm really just, I never want folks to feel as though the topics being talked about are so distant. And there's a lot of good work that everyone can do on an everyday basis. That's really what it's all about. And those every little bit that everyone's doing, it's what's going to shift us in the right direction. So,
Thank
and
you,
how we
Jose.
can cultivate greater dialogue, empathy, collaboration, So, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you. Mahalo. Thank you.
Yes, yes. And we got to remind ourselves to keep building peace, just one conversation at a time. That's really what it's all about.
Very good. Thank you so much, Jose. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Same here.
Okay.